Debt Free in 30, where every week we take 30 minutes and get practical advice from industry experts about personal finance and living debt-free. Here's your host, Doug Hoyes.
As listeners to this podcast know, I am not a fan of credit scores. In my book, Straight Talk on Your Money, on page 48, I have a section titled The Credit Score Scam, where I describe why credit scores were created for the benefit of the banks, not for you. There are a lot of problems with credit scores. I already told you the biggest problem. They were designed so that the banks could decide how much to lend you so they can maximize their profit. They were not designed to help you decide what would be a reasonable amount for you to borrow. I advise people not to live their life as though their most important objective is to get a high credit score. There are better financial objectives, like saving money. But of course, your savings don't appear on your credit report. So that's not what people focus on if all they want is a better credit score. But there are other problems. First, you never really know what credit score your bank is using when you apply for a loan. It's a secret. You can pay money to Equifax to get your Equifax credit score, but your bank might use the score calculated by TransUnion. Or more likely, they have their own calculation that may be different than what you get from the credit bureaus. Second, it's very common for there to be errors on your credit report, and those errors may affect the calculation of your credit score. Your credit score is based on many factors, like how much debt you owe, but the calculation also includes items like how long you've worked at the same employer, or how long you have lived at your current address. If those facts are wrong, your credit score may also not truly reflect your actual credit worthiness. And what about people who are new to Canada? If you move from one country to another, your credit score information is lost. Equifax Canada only has Canadian information, so if you are a recent immigrant, any information from your old country is lost. Of course, credit scores are based on the past, so if you are a young person or new to credit, you won't have a credit history, even if you have a good job and would otherwise be a good credit risk. Another problem with our current credit scoring system is that there is a high risk of identity theft. To apply for a loan, you must disclose a lot of personal information, and if an attacker can get that information, they can also apply for a loan in your name. We all remember the great Equifax data hack of 2017. Equifax was hackable because all of your data is maintained by one company, so there is only one point of failure. The final problem is that all of your credit data is centralized. All of your data in Canada is either at Equifax or TransUnion, so with only two big companies, it's not a very competitive market. So, what's the solution? Well, you could pay off all of your loans, pull all your money out of the bank and live like a hermit, but that's not a realistic solution. In today's society, your credit profile impacts a lot of things that don't involve borrowing money, like renting an apartment or getting a cell phone. We need a way to verify that our personal information is correct, but protect it from hacking. My guest today works for a company that believes they have a solution to those problems, and the solution involves blockchain technology. As always, here on Debt Free in 30, my job is not to endorse any of the companies I have on this show. I don't pay my guests to appear here, and they can't pay to be a guest. This is not a paid commercial for any of my guests. My job is to present the information and let you, the listener, make your own decisions. So, with that background, let's get started and meet today's guest. Who are you and what do you do?
My name is Derek Silva, and I'm the head of community relations at Bloom Protocol.
Great. Well, thanks for being here today, Derek. So tell me, where is Bloom located and where are you located?
It's slightly complicated. The larger entity that holds Bloom, or corporate structure, is actually based in Gibraltar. We're actually operating an American sub-corporation, I guess would be the best way to put that, or entity underneath that Gibraltar corporation, mostly out of San Francisco. But I'm actually in Kamoka, Ontario, which is just outside of London.
And I've never heard of Kamoka, Ontario before, but I have heard of London, Ontario. So that's good. So we're talking to a local guy here. So that's great. So now I don't want this to be a technical show. I want to talk about how you think Bloom is better than our current credit scoring system. But since Bloom is based on blockchain technology, and even though it's not, I don't think, fully necessary to understand blockchain to understand Bloom, perhaps you could start us off by giving a very simple explanation of what is blockchain.
I'll try to keep it under a minute.
That'd be great.
Basically, a blockchain is a triple entry accounting distributed ledger where any computer that's part of the network can actually participate. They would each hold a copy of the ledger, and any additional records added to the ledger are also linked to the previous entries. So each group of entries is a block, and every additional block you add is linked to the previous one, and therefore the chain. So a blockchain sounds really fancy. In a lot of ways, at its core, it's not. But it's what you can do with the blockchain that's really a big departure away from a traditional database like Microsoft SQL or Oracle or MySQL databases. You know, the stuff we use and interact with every day online and on our computers.
Yeah, and I want to go through sort of all the different elements of what's wrong with our credit scoring system today and see how both blockchain technology and your specific technology can help address that. I mean, in my head, I remember back, 30, 40 years ago when I was taking bookkeeping in high school, we had this green ledger paper and we'd write our entries on it. And obviously it wasn't very secure, and obviously there was only one copy of it. I kind of think of blockchain as, well, we've got the series of ledger paper, and like you say, all the transactions are put on it, and then each piece of paper is linked to the next one. That's right. The chain. But of course, it's not paper; it's computer. It's computerized. And the other big difference, of course, is that I don't just have my copy of it. When another block gets added to the chain, when another piece of paper gets added to the book, everybody who has a copy of it now has a copy of it on their computer as well. So that's what
Correct.
You mean by distributed, right? It's all out there. So
so there could be 100 computers. There are nodes and it gets really technical, which we said we weren't going to do. But yeah, so if you assume you have a computer running a full node on the Ethereum blockchain or the Bitcoin blockchain or the Litecoin blockchain, etc. There's probably about a dozen right now. Yes, you are helping verify each transaction, and that's how that chain gets formed. And of course, we've heard all about mining. In return for verifying those transactions, you get a piece of the pie in terms of the new Ether or Bitcoin or Litecoin that come out of each block, and a small fee for verifying each transaction. You get a portion of that depending on how much effort you put into it. That's the whole proof of work part of it.
And that's what makes it secure, and that's what makes it different than a piece of paper. Obviously, there's many different people active in it, and you've kind of raised that issue. Blockchain is not the same as Bitcoin. Bitcoin is based on blockchain. I mean, our paper money is based on paper. Paper isn't money. It's, the money is printed on the paper. It's kind of like Bitcoin is printed on the blockchain. Of course, it's not printed. It's computer technology, but the blockchain is the base for Bitcoin. It's also the base for Bloom, which is what we're going to talk about today. So I want to go through each individual thing, but can you give us kind of the overview of, okay, what is Bloom? How does the system work? Give us the big picture, and then we can dive into the details.
Sure. So the elevator pitch is that Bloom is an end-to-end protocol for identity attestation or verification, if you prefer, risk assessment, and credit scoring. And it runs entirely on the blockchain. So it lets traditional lenders like Libro Credit Union, Bank of Montreal, etc., and digital currency lenders. So whether it's Self-Lender, some of these newer companies like ETHLend, Fundery, Everex, lets traditional and digital currency lenders serve as many people as they want to. There are billions right now who don't have a bank account of any kind, who can't access a credit score of any kind. It lets those lenders serve billions of people who do and don't have a bank account or credit score right now.
Okay, so let's think of this from the point of view of the consumer then. Because I don't really care about the banks. I care about actual real people. So I'm a guy who wants to get a loan, and the way it works now, I go to, in your example, Libro Credit Union, Bank of Montreal, whatever, and they would run a credit check on me through Equifax or TransUnion, and if my score is high enough and if everything checks out, then I would get the loan. With your system then, is it as simple as the Bank of Montreal or some other lender would run a check on me through Bloom, where all the information is stored on the Bloom blockchain? Is it as simple as that, or am I missing the point?
No, you're not missing the point. Certainly that's obviously the goal. We want to make it incredibly easy for people to access credit based on a lot more data than the bank will typically take into account right now. So there's a bunch of things. You've got a lot of your data being stored by Equifax or TransUnion right now. And as we saw recently, apparently that data is not stored.
Yeah, we've done some shows on that. Not a pretty sight there.
Right. So removing and abstracting that from a traditional database means putting it on the blockchain instead, and also using a fully encrypted, secure file system that actually puts you in full control of when that data is accessed, who accesses it, how much information they get access to, and how long they're allowed to look at it. So basically, you are in full control of your ID now, and so we call that Bloom ID.
Bloom ID.
Yeah.
So, okay, so one of the elements to my credit score is where do I live? Okay, I realize there's many elements to it. What debt do I have and where do I work and everything? But let's take one little tiny piece, and that's where I live. So I assume on Equifax or TransUnion, I fill out an application form for a credit card and I put my address on it, and that gets fed into their system. How does Bloom or Bloom ID verify where I live?
So we're going to let you do that in a few different ways. You will be able to validate or verify your ID by using an automated system, a data attester, or a data verifier, if you prefer that term. So you'll be able to feed in your driver's license or your passport, a utility bill, cell phone bill, anything like that has your name and your address on it. I guess your passport doesn't have your address on it, but your driver's license certainly does. And that data will be verified. However, we don't keep the data. We keep the fact that it's been verified. That is stored on that fully encrypted file system. And so when you go to share your information with a bank or just a plain loan company like Fairstone or somebody like that, they will get verification that you do live where you say you do, or that you do have a valid driver's license, or you do have a valid passport and it matches your name, you've verified your phone number, et cetera, and so on. They're going to get the fact that data is verified, not all the data itself.
So they don't get a copy of my driver's license.
No.
They get a tick box that says, yep, we've verified that his driver's license exists and it's real. So how does that actually happen then? So, I understand the concept of, well, okay, I can scan my driver's license and upload it. Mm-hmm. So is there a human being looking at it?
We've got a data testing partner who does that all automated. They've already been doing this for a bunch of different companies. They've been in business for several years. They're really, really good at it. And so they've got a proven solution that can do this in an automated manner and eliminate the data from their system once it's been verified. So there will be a very temporary copy of your driver's license, on somebody's cloud. Mm-hmm. But once the process is complete, That data is scrubbed from their system. We get a verification that it's real and that it exists and it's valid. And everybody moves on. The data is scrubbed from the system and it's no longer at risk of being stolen by anyone.
So it's like optical character recognition or something that it
That
can
sort of thing, yeah.
read my name off the driver's license.
Read your name. It can find the hologram, from the Ontario driver's license. They've got partnerships set up to validate that this driver's license does exist. And, it's still valid up until, 2019 or what have you. And can be used successfully to validate that Derek does in fact live at this address in Kamoka, Ontario.
Gotcha. And then it would be a similar process for things like verifying my employment information then.
Correct. Yeah, we've got a partner already set up for the U.S. I don't think they operate in Canada, but hopefully we'll find somebody that can do that. And similarly, do I work for Bloom Protocol LLC? Yes or no? That data can be verified. No, it doesn't have to be verified by a data tester. I'll say very briefly, we're letting people take the initiative to actually do this themselves. If you want to, spend a little bit of money to have your driver's license verified, your utility bill verified, your phone, etc. Not everything will cost money, but if you do want to spend a couple bucks and get that all done yourself, you're more than welcome to do that, and you don't have to worry about somebody else doing it. We are some of our lending partners will actually take the initiative. They have Bloom tokens, which I'm sure we'll talk about later, and to spend on the protocol and get that done for you in anticipation that they'll make that money back because, you're taking out a loan. And of course, there's going to be an interest rate of 5, 6, 7%, or maybe 2% if you're amazing, an amazing risk. And, they're willing to put out that money. And like I said, it's not going to be very expensive, but we've got partners who will do that for you if you go to them and they want you to set up a Bloom ID because that's their preferred method now, instead of checking Equifax or TransUnion.
Now, you said that, and so I understand what you're describing. It may be that I go into the bank and they take a look at my driver's license and it gets scanned through the system the way you describe and then gets deleted. Yeah. Or it may be that I decide, no, I don't want the bank to have my driver's license. I'm going to go onto the system myself. And like you say, maybe it costs me a couple of bucks or something to scan it and have it verified and whatnot. Yeah. So how do I keep, you made the comment that I'm in control. So I get to decide who sees my information. So right now, if my data is at Equifax, anybody who has access to Equifax can get the data. Okay. Yeah. I mean, anyone who has the right to do a credit check can do a credit check. But what you're saying is, well, no, I'm the one who controls the switch, whether someone sees it or not. So I guess if I'm going to bank ABC to apply for a loan, I would say, yep, they can see it, but no one else can see it. How does that work? So we've got a web app already, where you can, create your Bloom ID in a week or two. You'll be able to start verifying all this additional data. And we've got a mobile app in development as well, which thankfully in Canada, we're fortunate enough to be in a position where the majority of people have smartphones, whether they're Android or iOS based. And so regardless of which way you access the app, you will have a request to authorize sharing data with the company you're trying to do business with. So it's not an automatic, like I've shown up at BMO and I'm applying for a mortgage and they just start accessing my Bloom, the data I have stored on with Bloom, or the attestations stored with Bloom. They actually have to ask for that. Anything beyond your score, which I imagine we'll talk about later. We'll talk about that, yeah. So I go to the bank to apply for a loan, and I'm going to get some kind of alert on my phone or my computer saying this bank wants to see these pieces of information. Yep. Do you agree? And I say, yep, I agree, but they can only see it for the next 3 days.
Yeah, 3 days, a week, could be a month. It'll depend on your your existing relationship, if you're already banking at RBC and they only need a little bit of extra data, yeah, they probably only need it for a couple of days. If you're creating a whole new relationship with Scotiabank or Meridian Credit Union or what have you, they might want access to it for a week. But regardless, yes, you're actually authorizing sharing that data. You could do it right there on your phone, while you're in the meeting, or go home and log into the Bloom app and then hit authorize. And yes, they get that data for a specific period of time, after which it's their access to it is revoked. We're using one-time keys. This will actually be done using the blockchain. The Ethereum blockchain has a really cool technology to it called Whisper that we'll be using for this, and that Whisper protocol uses a one-time secure key. It's never reused again, and that's how that data is shared directly to that organization, only with that organization, and then is revoked after a period of time.
Now, I want to get into specifics, but the obvious question here is, so what's this going to cost me?
We haven't revealed everything yet, but at this point, I would say to get a full-blown Bloom ID with every possible piece of information validated up front. At this point, it's probably going to cost you less than $20.
Less than $20. And I guess on the other hand, Equifax is free. I don't have to pay anything for the bank to go into my Equifax report and look at stuff.
Right.
Of course, it's out there floating in the world, so that's the downside.
The downside is that you have really very little control over what information is still there. I was just looking at mine through a service called Borrowwell yesterday, and it's out of date. Like, I know it's out of date because it says I've got loans paid off, but open that I know for a fact are closed, but the organization that loan was with, like a car loan, reported that I paid it off, but hasn't reported that it's closed. So even though I've got the discharge papers and everything else from that loan, so and I have no recourse. I could call Scotiabank and say, hey, this loan, for this vehicle, it's paid off, and I know this is closed. I've got the discharge papers. Why have you not reported that to Equifax? Scotiabank doesn't care. And certainly I could maybe yell and scream my way to a manager of some kind that could do that, but it's not really worth it. And unless you set up, some sort of system to actually go start digging through that data, it's onerous to even bother looking at it, let alone to try and get something done about it. It's the power is really within, in the organization's hands, not in yours. And we find that incredibly problematic.
Yeah, well, like I said in the introduction, credit scores aren't for your benefit. They're for the benefit of the lender and for the credit bureaus. So
yeah, we're really trying to flip this on its head.
Yeah, which is good. I mean, the problem with an entity like Borrowwell or one of these others that give you free access to your credit report and your credit score is that nothing is free. I mean, you've now given someone else the ability to look at everything in your credit report, and now you're on the mailing list to get all the different loan offers and this, that.
Oh yeah,
and the other thing.
I've got offers but I've got high probability to get accepted for about 30 different credit cards apparently.
Yeah, sweet. So. Well, if you get all 30, my name and number. You've got my card.
I'll let you know.
We know what the inevitable result will be. So, so what you're saying is, well, okay, with the Bloom system, it may not cost you anything because the lender may pick up the cost to verify your driver's license and everything else. But if I want to be proactive and put the information in there myself, then there may be a cost to it. Nothing in life is free. Obviously, the free credit report I'm getting puts me on this mailing list and reveals my data. So you got to pay for something. So, okay, so let's get into the nitty gritty here. And I'd like you to explain why the Bloom system is better than what we have now. So I'm going to fire off some points to you, and you tell me why you think your system is better than what we have with Equifax and TransUnion now. So okay. I said in the introduction that you never really know your credit score. There's the Equifax score, there's the TransUnion score, and then the bank you're dealing with may have some other calculation that they use to determine their own kind of score. So with your system, is there a score, and can I figure out what it is?
Yes, and yes. You will always have access to your Bloom score. You can have it updated at any time. Again, it's fully within your control.
So I just log in and there it is.
You log in, there it is. It might not be real time up to date, but if you've got a couple of Bloom tokens you want to spend to get it updated, you can do that.
And we're going to talk about Bloom tokens in a bit. So,
yeah.
So literally any time I want, I can go in, and see where it's at. It can be updated or whatever. So,
absolutely.
Okay. So problem number 2 with our current system, and you already raised it. You just gave the perfect example about errors on your credit report. I've already paid off that loan. It's completely discharged. Why is it still showing up? Or, my father has the exact same name as me. I'm Junior. But we have the exact same name. Now, he's got a different birth date than me, obviously, and a different address, but it's not that uncommon for errors to creep in when you've got a similar name to somebody else, and then obviously,
right.
Loans are paid off or whatever. So how is your system going to reduce or eliminate errors on credit reports?
So as we already alluded to earlier, anytime you're applying for some sort of credit using your Bloom ID, that everything is tied directly back to your Bloom ID. It's not just somebody's name. So, Doug Hoyes is one name. David Smith, boy, go to 411.ca and look for David Smith or John Smith. There are, thousands of both, maybe more. So, we're not just tying it to some not random, but, somebody's name and address they may or may not still have at this time. Everything's been verified and validated and is kept up to date. And therefore it's actually tied to your Bloom ID, which is a mixture of your name, your email address, your phone number. That's all tied to you and your identity. And so it's very much a one-to-one relationship from the get-go. And all of our partners that we've already signed up and are ready to go as soon as we get phase 2 launched here in the next couple weeks, they've agreed to feed that data back into the system on an ongoing basis. And because of the way smart contracts work inherently, when it's done, it's done. So I'll give a really quick example. If you go to one of our partners called ETHLend, ETHLEND, .io, and you take out a loan, which somebody on the other end funds, there's actually a smart contract on the blockchain that is open until such time that the requirements have been fulfilled. So let's assume you borrowed $500. You make a couple of payments back. The smart contract has been the terms of the smart contract have been fulfilled. The $500 plus interest have been paid back. The lender gets their interest and their capital. You've benefited, from that loan, hopefully, and did what you needed to do with it. And the smart contract is actually closed. It completes. And the fact that it's closed and is actually completed now gets reported back instantly back to our risk assessment system, which is called Bloom IQ. And so it's updated immediately. As soon as that has been reflected on the blockchain, which would be instant, it gets back to our risk assessment system, and so you don't end up with nebulous numbers of loans that are still open after how many years because TD, Scotiabank, RBC, et cetera, just didn't bother reporting back that it was actually that the loan has been discharged. So
there's 2 different reasons then why you think there'll be a lot less errors. Number 1, it's tied to me. So not my name, because like you say, David Smith, there's thousands of them, but there's only one person that has my Bloom ID. And I'm the one obviously in control of taking a look to see if there's any issues with that. And then obviously the instant reporting, which wouldn't apply, I guess, on my Visa card because that's not on the blockchain, but for a new type of loan, it would. So, okay. So what happens then if I'm new to Canada? Because we all know that Equifax Canada only has Canadian information on it. So if I was living in the United States or some other country for the last few years and now I've moved here, none of that information gets transferred over. I'm assuming the Bloom system is a worldwide system, therefore the whole world is on it. Is it as simple as that?
It actually is pretty much as simple as that. So, if you're from Sudan, you might not have the capital to build up your own Bloom ID, but you could be doing business with a local partner in that part of Africa who does, work with Bloom and is reporting that data back and spent the $5-10 or what have you to get a Bloom ID started for you, and you're already building up your credit score because you've borrowed a little bit of money to improve your life or something like that. Or at the very least, there could be a nonprofit in the area who just wants to help out, individuals get a Bloom ID so that they have some sort of system they can use elsewhere, regardless of where they live. I could see lots of different potential, ways that gets started. But yeah, if you start your Bloom ID anywhere and you do build up a Bloom score somehow, that comes with you. That's a big part of what we're trying to do is provide a global federated identity that you can use just about anywhere. And your Bloom score comes with you as a result. I find it incredibly odd that Equifax operates in, I think it's 24, 25 different countries, and yet that data is not, maybe it's good because, we just saw a big breach, but yes, that data, or at least your score, can't come with you. Like I find that baffling. Why bother letting me build up a credit score in the UK and yet not bring it to Canada and vice versa, or the US to Canada? Look, Lord knows how much, migration there is back and forth and dual citizens there are and that sort of thing. There are dual citizens in the US and Canada who have two different Equifax scores because, despite it being, the same corporate umbrella, that data doesn't intermingle in any way. So it's maybe not an issue for, I could see it being an issue for some baby boomers who maybe want to move abroad and buy a little vacation home somewhere in the south of France or something like that. But definitely for people in their 20s and 30s who want to do the digital nomad lifestyle, work remotely, live in other places for a little while before settling down somewhere, this is going to be a bigger and bigger problem for a lot of people.
What about the risk of identity theft then? So I think you've kind of touched on that, but we know about the whole Equifax breach from 2017. How will the Bloom system prevent my identity from being waved around the world?
Yeah, so in a few ways. One, we're not storing the data. We're not storing your driver's license. We're not storing your SIN number. We're not storing any sort of personally identifiable information that is, that somebody would actually need to steal your identity. We're not storing any of that. We're having it verified and attested one time. Or, if your driver's license expires, you might need to do it again at that time. But again, it's verified and attested then, and then we're storing the fact that it's been verified and attested, not the data itself. So that's one big way. The other way is that everything is fully encrypted on that encrypted file system I mentioned. It's called IPFS. If anybody wants to look it up, I don't think we're going to get into it. But we're using that to actually store those attestations. And then, again, as I mentioned, to share anything beyond your Bloom score, somebody will actually need to ask for permission to view that data. And that happens on the blockchain. And so you'd get a request and you authorize it, or you can reject it. I mean, there's nothing stopping you from going to Meridian Credit Union saying, I want a loan. And they say, okay, well, what's your Bloom ID? Great. Okay, there's your Bloom score. We need some more data. They ask for it. You go home and you can think to yourself, you know what? I don't really want to share that data. I think the Bloom score should have been enough. So you can actually reject it, and then they get nothing. So those three things put together, it is miles and above, or miles and away, better and far more secure than Equifax or TransUnion at this point.
Yeah, it's all fully encrypted. It's not stored. But you did say the Bloom score is available.
Bloom scores themselves are public. So you could potentially go through our protocol if you're a partner or you've hooked into it and see, oh, there's 500 people with a Bloom score of, 500, a couple thousand with a Bloom score of 450, et cetera. But there's no identity data tied to that. Not your name, not your address, your phone number, your email address. Nothing is tied to that. In order for somebody to actually figure out whose Bloom score is what, they'd actually have to talk to you directly, and you would show them, in the mobile app instead, if you were talking face to face.
So if someone knows my Bloom ID, it's easy for them to get my Bloom score. Is that correct?
If somebody knows your Bloom ID because you've given it to them,
yeah,
yes, they could see your Bloom score, and that's it.
But if you don't know my Bloom ID, there's no way to get my Bloom score then, because that's one has to be tied together. I mean, if you know my name, you can do a search on Equifax for my name.
Right.
And if my name is Doug Hoyes, there's not too many of those, so it's easy to find. If my name is David Smith, well, then obviously you got to have more information, birth dates and addresses and so on. So, so that's what makes the whole system very secure then, is it's all encrypted. The data itself is not stored. There is no centralized store of information. That's the whole problem with Equifax and
Exactly.
And TransUnion. It's all in one place. Well, it isn't in one place. Really, all that's in one place is the fact that this piece of information has been verified and that piece of information has been verified. The information itself isn't there. So ultimately, would Bloom work as a credit bureau? Is that the intention, or is it just trying to modernize part of the credit lending process? Is it really more about identity verification, or could it ultimately be a replacement for Equifax and TransUnion?
I think we could see a future where, you could potentially treat Bloom as a credit bureau. We're not forcing people to become official partners, in order to use, the Bloom protocol. We'll provide them high touch support, of course, and promote them and things like that. There's benefits to doing so. But, if BMO wanted to build a separate system on the Bloom protocol and interact with people using a Bloom ID and their Bloom score and feed data back into Bloom IQ so that we can get good risk assessment. There's nothing stopping them from doing that. But again, you're still going to need to know somebody's Bloom ID. You're actually going to have to hook into the protocol. So we've got smart contracts to do that. So it's not like they can just start trawling through the data using a web interface.
Do you worry about the fact that blockchain in certain applications, I mean, it's slow. You've got, in some cases, expensive transaction fees. It's not entirely scalable. I mean, you look at something like Bitcoin. Well, and I'm just going to make up numbers here because, facts don't matter. But I mean, with Bitcoin, there can be, 100 transactions a second or whatever it is. Whereas with the Visa network, well, there can be, 60,000 a second or an hour or whatever it is. Like the scale is much more developed. Now, I realize we're not talking about Bitcoin here. We're talking about Bloom, which is built on, blockchain and has some elements of Ethereum to it. Is it scalable enough that this can be a thing someday?
We're confident that it is. No, there's no hiding the fact that the Ethereum blockchain has had some scaling issues, but there are incredibly bright and determined developers who are working on that. There are some proposed solutions already. There's at least 3 or 4 different ways that are going to add additional scalability. They know that they need to approach Visa type levels, which is, like 1 billion transactions a day. But, we're not there yet. But right now, we're actually on only 52% capacity of the Ethereum blockchain, and that's at 675,000 transactions in the last 24 hours. But Bitcoin has a much slower blockchain. You're right. The block times are longer, so the number of transactions that are waiting in a queue in order to get processed in a block and have somebody mine or have computers mine that block and verify everything, it's quite slow. I just experienced it last week, and to get 12 computers to verify that my transaction was real, in addition to a few other ones in that block, was painfully slow. Ethereum is much quicker. I've seen transactions get verified in 30 seconds. So, when you're sitting in an office with, a mortgage broker or what have you, or not a broker, but, the mortgage person at your bank, 30 seconds is an instant. I've seen, in-system verifications take longer than that. So Ethereum is much, much quicker. Right now, it would probably cost you a couple of cents to get a transaction across, depending on what you're doing. So it depends on the day, it depends on what's going on, but I'm very, very confident that the scalability issues can be solved. And literally, probably later this year. It will be significantly faster later this year. Give it another year or two, and we'll be hitting Visa levels fairly soon.
Cool. And for anyone who's listening, we're recording this at the end of March 2018. It'll be released in April 2018. So if you're listening to this in the future,
call me on it.
Yeah, exactly. A lot of people do listen to past episodes of the podcast. So that's good. So what do you see then as the future for Bloom, and specifically in Canada? Do you see it, being widely adopted, or do you see it as being a niche product? What do you see the future as?
I think it'll definitely start out as a niche product. If you haven't been paying attention to the blockchain space for the last 6 months, you probably have not heard of Bloom, and that's fine. We know that. Our co-founding team is built of 2 incredibly bright engineers and 2 incredibly bright marketers. So between the 4 of them, we really have what it takes to get the product right and to get the marketing, the engagement, right, get out of the gate. We're definitely starting with people who are, what are we calling it, crypto aware. They know about Bitcoin, Ethereum, Litecoin, etc. They know about projects being built on the Ethereum blockchain and what smart contracts are, at least to a small extent, and the fact that we're using them. And we will expand out towards, those people, those individuals, friends and family, because that's obviously the next logical place to go. And eventually, looking for mass adoption. We've already got, I think it's about 8 or 9 different lending partners, both traditional and digital currency, peer-to-peer type lenders, ready to go. And we'll continue to look for additional, organizations to do the same thing with. So it could be your credit union in a year or 2, or it could be, one of the big 5 banks that we get through to first. We're not worried about that. We know it'll come. And when we're ready for that level of scale, we'll be doing the work we need to do to make sure everybody knows what Bloom ID is. It will certainly start out as a niche, but we'll get there in terms of mass adoption.
So what is a Bloom token?
A Bloom token is, okay, so with the Ethereum blockchain has this standard called an ERC20 token. And that allows you to build your own token on top of the same blockchain and use it typically within your app, your protocol that you're building. People can buy it and sell it elsewhere on token exchanges. But the idea is that it's available. You're not mining these, so they're available right out the gate. And it's like an internal currency.
So it's like a loonie.
It's like a loonie. You can use it within Canada. You can't use it anywhere else, right? Or it's like going to an arcade. You can buy tokens at the arcade. You can use them at the arcade. You can't really use them anywhere else. You could potentially sell those to somebody at a premium or a discount, depending on the day. And then those individuals could use them at the arcade as well. It's that sort of thing. And it makes it, and we've done that for a few reasons. It gives us far less volatility to deal with than pricing everything in Ether or in Bitcoin or anything else. And it removes the need for an individual to hold a specific international fiat currency. So you don't have to hold US dollars or Canadian dollars or euros or Russian rubles or Chinese yuan or anything like that in order to use the protocol. And you can get Bloom tokens from a bunch of different places right now.
So if I wanted to, verify my driver's license and I go on the system and it says, okay, you can do it, but you got to pay 2 Bloom tokens to do it, and I'm just making that up. I have no idea what the cost is. Then I would have to buy the Bloom tokens.
Yes.
And I could buy those. Can I buy those with Canadian dollars, or do I have to buy them with Ether or Bitcoin or some cryptocurrency?
Right now, you can buy them with either Ether or Bitcoin, depending on the cryptocurrency exchange you're using.
So that's, I guess, one barrier to mass adoption, that the average person hasn't figured out how to actually get Ether or Bitcoin.
Right.
In even longer term, that's still going to be the way it works. If I want to be part of the system, I mean, if I want to, it's kind of like you say, at the arcade, or if I want to have a token for the subway system in Toronto, well, that's the token.
Yeah.
That's what you've got to get. So do you envision a time where I will be able to buy a Bloom token for Canadian dollars, or is it, no, you're going to have to go onto an exchange, buy some Ether, buy some Bitcoin, and then use that to buy the Bloom tokens?
I haven't asked the co-founders this question, but I can foresee a time where that is possible, where you will just come and buy a couple of Bloom tokens, whatever ones you need, or however many you need rather, and then spend those within the protocol. And that will help eliminate waste, will obviously help induce mass adoption and that sort of thing.
Yeah, and obviously I understand you don't want everyone going out speculating in Bloom tokens, just like the TTC doesn't want people speculating in subway tokens. They want them to be in circulation and be used. So
yeah.
Okay, so I mean, I guess my summary of this is there's some pretty cool technology here, and there's some pretty cool advantages over what we have now, but we're not there yet. I mean, we've got limitations to blockchain. We've got, obviously not every lender is on the system. There's issues with the tokens and whatnot, but there's, it's certainly something to keep an eye on. So if I am either a consumer or a business and I'm interested in Bloom, where can I find more information?
You can visit our website. That's bloom.co. No weird spelling. If you are an individual who wants to get their Bloom ID up and running, even if you haven't bought any Ether or Bitcoin or anything like that so far, I would encourage you to go to bloom.co/identity, and we'll actually give you one free Bloom token to get started. So that's relatively new.
So Bloom, BLOOM.co, and then bloom.co/identity if you want to poke around and check it out.
Yep.
And I guess at this point, if there's, no lender or nobody at the other end that's, using it, it's premature, but it's something that may become a thing. I mean, it sounds to me like there will be a network where I can go on. I mean, you gave the example of the $500 loan.
Yes.
And I'm not going to go on to a payday loan rant here because that's not the purpose of this show, but I guess it would be kind of cool if I want to borrow $500. I go on to a lending system and there's, peer-to-peer lending, some guy at the other end who wants to lend $500. And with Bloom, they don't have to be going to Equifax and doing credit checks and all the rest of it. It could be done through their system, basically on the blockchain as you described it. That may be one of the biggest uses for Bloom in the future. Is that possible?
I think that's for this year. I think that'll be one of our big starting points. So, like I mentioned, we've got already a bunch of digital currency lenders who are either operating right now or will be operating really soon. ETHLend is actually up and running. They've been going for several months now. They've facilitated 3,000 or 4,000 Ether worth of loans. So that literally equates to a couple of $1 million US or Canadian worth of loans. And the issue you would have right now is that you need to have collateral for the loan. So if you want to borrow $500, you need to put up some sort of ERC20 token as collateral. So whether that's Bloom tokens, whether it's I think they're willing to take 140, 150 different tokens right now. as collateral. You've got to put up some collateral. So you kind of have the money already, but you don't want to sell those tokens in order to facilitate this thing, right? You want to borrow somebody else's instead. One of the nice things is that you actually get to decide the terms of your loan. So if you need to borrow it for, let's say you want to borrow $5,000 for 6 months, and you're going to make 6 payments, one monthly, and you're willing to borrow at 6%. You actually get to put in all that information. Right now, ETHLend is not putting any specific terms on the loans that are being generated on the platform. And so, of course, if you can't find a lender that's willing to agree to your terms, that's a separate issue. But you actually get to put in there, like, I'm willing to pay 5% over the next 6 months on a $5,000 loan. I will make 1 payment a month, 2 payments a month, whatever you think you can commit to. And hopefully within a day or two, you'll find somebody to put up the money for that loan. Once they've built in Bloom ID and Bloom Score, then we'll move on to that system where, you've got a Bloom Score, you've got a validated ID, and people can go on that instead of having to put up that collateral.
Cool. So there's going to be many developments as we go forward on this.
Yeah,
so certainly something to keep an eye on.
Specifically, we've got Everx, we've got Fundery that will have similar but different systems. And then we've got a company out of the US called Self-Lender, which is actually more of a traditional lending platform, but they see an opportunity to reach more people by using the Bloom protocol. And so despite the fact that they're more of a traditional lender, we've got them on board. They'll be building into the Bloom or hooking into the Bloom protocol later this year, and really utilizing it the way a bank would, or the way a Fairstone or that type of company would.
Excellent. Well, I think that is a lot of information. That's a great way to end it. My guest today was Derek Silva, the head of community relations at Bloom Protocol. Derek, thanks for being here today.
Thanks for having me, Doug. It was a treat.
Excellent. Thanks very much. That's our show for today. You can find links to Bloom and everything else we talked about and a full transcript of today's show over at hoyes.com. That's HOYES.com. My guess is that it'll take a while for Bloom or something like it to achieve widespread adoption, so I expect we'll be using Equifax and TransUnion for some time to come. But I also think as consumers, we should be aware of what's out there so you can be ready for whatever changes happen because technology moves fast. Thanks for listening. Until next week, I'm Doug Hoyes. That was Debt Free in 30.